Lunges and shoulder presses, both fantastic in their own right, but doing the same standard exercises time and time again gets a bit boring after a while. See, I'm a really big fan of finding interesting and fun exercises. Now, interesting and fun in the world of exercise doesn't mean interesting and fun in a lot of other ways, because for it to be interesting, it needs to be mentally engaging, which is where Spartan lunges come into place. Spartan lunges being what I call the combination of a shoulder press and a lunge put together. Because if you want to make something more intense, just reference it to the Spartans. You know, that's how this thing works, right? Before I tell you how to do a Spartan lunge, first I think it's useful to just refresh a normal lunge. You first would have your feet together like so, and then you would step forward. So that your feet were roughly, I don't know, let's call that 24 inches, so 2 feet apart. And then you would just go ahead and descend so that your forward-facing leg is parallel to the floor, and so that your leg is perpendicular to the ground. And then you would come up, and when you come up, of course, your feet would come back together. A normal lunge, then, is a walking lunge. Walking lunge is just another word or name for lunges. With the normal stuff out of the way, let's begin altering this. The first major change is that we're not gonna walk forward, we're gonna walk backward. And I'm going backwards because it forces you to slow everything down. You see, if you're not used to ever going backwards, the first times you do it, you're gonna feel like you're falling a little bit. We don't walk around in day-to-day life backwards. That'd be a really weird thing to do if you just saw someone walking down the street backwards. You would be like, hey, who is that weird person? But that's the whole idea, because we want it to be weird, but not so weird that you can't do it, but weird enough that you have an idea of how to do it, but you need to slow it all down first. So that I'm gonna bring my foot back about 2 feet. Now, if you're finding this particularly difficult at first, I would recommend saying these steps. Start with feet together, then foot back, stabilize, then drop, stabilize, so that once again, your forward-facing leg is parallel to the ground, and that your knee, or I should say just your leg in general, is making a 90-degree angle with that floor. And then from this position, you're just going to step forward into it, so that the ending part of a backwards lunge or reverse lunge is the exact same thing as a walking lunge. You just begin it in the opposite way. I would recommend doing backward lunges for about, let's say, 2 weeks or so, long enough so that you can just drop backwards, go down, and then back up with no hesitation. And so you're not like, oh, you know, we don't want freakouts here. Now we're gonna start to change up our feet position. You see, before our feet were right next to each other, but now we're gonna make these separated. I would recommend just a little bit wider than shoulder distance. Now, because our feet are now farther apart, when you go backwards, it's gonna feel way more folly than before. Not sure if that's a word, but I'm gonna stick with it. Because beforehand, when your feet are together and you just step back, you can step back in a line. But if you separate these feet and you go back, you're gonna feel like falling back into it. And so once again, when doing this, say the steps out loud. We're gonna keep saying feet together, not so much because they are together, but just because if you say feet apart, it sounds weird to say feet apart even if you're bringing them back together. You get what I'm saying. So feet together, but apart. From here then, it's going to be back, stabilize, drop, so that your thigh parallel to the ground and your leg perpendicular to the ground. Stabilize, back up, plant. I would recommend doing the wide variation of the backward lunge about, again, 3 weeks or so. Now that you've learned how to do a wide reverse lunge, we're ready to add the weight for the Spartan lunge. To briefly go over how a shoulder press works, you want to have the weight pointed so that if it was falling straight down, your hip would catch it. So that it's not, so your elbow isn't back here, because if this weight fell,
and my elbow was behind my hip, this would come like a chicken wing. And that, not the most comfortable way of holding a weight. And so you want it to be folding in so that it's planted on the hip. And then when you push a weight above your head, it goes directly above your head, so that gravity is only pushing it down. If it's in front of you, gravity's pushing it like that. With the weight in hand, it's time to do a Spartan lunge. Anyways, so feet nice and together, then step back so that your feet are about 2 feet apart or something like that. Then drop, stabilize, shoulder press, and all while stabilizing, then feet back together. There are a few things to take note of here. The first is that it is really critical that you keep your pelvis centered underneath your shoulders. Otherwise, you're gonna banana down like this, or your butt's gonna stick out like this. Neither of which are particularly good for your posture or for the exercise in general. You also want to make sure that as you're pushing up, your core is incredibly engaged. Because if it isn't, then what's going to happen is you're going to push up and your chest is going to push back, and you're going to, once again, throw the alignment of your shoulders to your pelvis off. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to do a Spartan lunge. If you have any comments, please feel free to just leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. And until I see you again, have a good one.